Hans Landa is considered by many to be the greatest villain of all time. His vicious intelligence, mastery of manipulation, and surprising charisma make him one of those characters that you simultaneously love to hate, but equally hate that you love. In this video, I'm going to try and capture what makes Hans Landa such a captivating villain. Our first glimpse of Hans is during the famous Farmhouse Interrogation scene. The best scene in the entire movie, and arguably one of the best Quentin Tarantino has ever shot, and that's saying something. This scene is a masterclass in tension. The entire time my sphincter was clenched tight enough to use as a cigar cutter. He walks out of the car, and instantly, decades of seeing high-ranking Nazis in films prepares you for him to be a hyper-assertive, super-formal knobhead. But he's disarmingly warm. He starts the conversation like he's meeting a potential new friend. He even suggests to Monsieur Lapidite that he was hoping he could be invited inside his home, rather than telling him to let him in immediately as he had the authority to. When Monsieur Lapidite introduces his daughters to Landa, he greets them warmly and even politely kisses one of them on the back of the hand. At least that's what I thought the first 10 times I watched the movie. But recently one of my friends pointed out that he held her hand for a suspiciously long amount of time, and it's much more likely that he was in fact checking her pulse to see if she had an elevated heart rate, indicating that she had something to hide. He even does it again to a different daughter when he requests a glass of milk. I'm still not entirely convinced by this theory, as Landa could just be a bit of a creep. Also, an unexpected visit from a high-ranking Nazi would be an anxiety-inducing event for anyone living in occupied France. Plus, in order to gauge that accurately, you'd really need to know someone's normal resting heart rate. But maybe I'm just overthinking it. I go back and forth on this one, so let me know what you think in the comments. Is this an example of Tarantino focusing on every minute detail and rewarding careful observation? Or more likely an example of fans pulling out stupid theories from their butt? Back to the interrogation. When Landa wishes to speak to Monsieur Lapidite in private, he requests, "If it wouldn't offend them, could you please ask your lovely ladies to step outside?" He even asks for permission before switching from French to English. He claims the request is because he's exhausted the extent of his French, and he would rather not embarrass himself, which would be understandable for anyone except him. His French up until now has been impeccable, and given his mastery of several other languages, I find it hard to believe. Much more likely is that he wanted to ensure that if anyone was hiding, they'd be unable to listen to the conversation. The constant requests for permission demonstrate that Landa doesn't feel the need to assert his dominance. He's comfortable playing the role of the supplicant, as he's so secure and confident that he isn't afraid of looking like the weaker or lower status man. Of course, this is in part because he knows that he's in an unambiguous position of power. Though he frames all his requests merely as suggestions, the truth that they both understand is that Monsieur Lapidite has no choice but to comply with Landa, as he has an armed escort with him. But the veneer of this being a choice helps to put Monsieur Lapidite at ease, creating the illusion that he still retains some portion of control. As a result, he's more relaxed and at ease than he would be otherwise, which results in him revealing more than he would have with a more directly confrontational officer. He starts the interrogation proper, first by reassuring Monsieur Lapidite that this is purely an administrative task, and that once this checkbox exercise is completed, his family will be left undisturbed. Landa then asks Lapidite whether he's heard anything about the missing local Jewish family, the Dreyfuses, that Landa is tasked with hunting down. Lapidite attempts to avoid the question, claiming that he's only heard rumors, to which Landa excitedly responds,
"Facts can be so misleading. Rumors, true or false, are often revealing."
Monsieur Lapidite then states that he heard that the Dreyfuses had escaped to Spain. In my mind, this was the moment in which Hans was certain that Lapidite knew where the Dreyfuses were. As if he were as unconnected to them as he claimed, how could he possibly have gotten that information? Landa tells Lapidite that he's required to conduct a thorough search of the house, and assures him that any potential irregularities present will be discovered, unless of course he can be given information that renders the search unnecessary. He then reassures him that the information would not be met with a punishment, but rather the reward of his family being left alone unmolested. In doing this, Landa creates a strong incentive for Lapidite to confess, And this won't be the last time that he attempts to solve a problem by creating incentives for someone to help him in achieving his goals. Landa not only deduces that Lapidie is hiding Jews, but also manages to get him not only to confess, but additionally help in pointing out the specific place where the Jews are hiding under the floorboards, all without making a single direct threat or display of force. This entire scene feels like a predator playing with its prey, lulling it into a false sense of security, only to pounce on it suddenly and violently. In order not to alert the Dreyfuses hiding under the floorboards, he switches back to French and pretends to leave. Meanwhile, he quietly orders his men to come in and fire upon the area pointed out by Monsieur Lapidie. Miraculously, one of them manages to escape and makes a run for it. Landa slowly exits the farmhouse and pulls out his pistol. The entire scene is framed like he's about to do the craziest no-scope headshot of all time. But anticlimactically, he doesn't even bother with a shot.
Shosanna!
This scene used to frustrate me, as I couldn't understand why he didn't just take the shot. But with a better understanding of the character now, I think it's because he understands his strengths and weaknesses. He's not a sniper. If they needed one of those, they would have called in Frederick Zoller or Bobley Swag or someone like him. He's just a detective.
Damn good detective.
But that still leaves the question, why didn't he pursue her, or at the very least send his men after her? That question bugged me for years too, but I found out that in the original script, there was a scene where Landa explained to his driver why he let Shosanna escape. Landa didn't see her as a threat or as an enemy of the state, as she was a young girl with no food, shelter, or shoes, who had just witnessed the murder of her entire family. Additionally, news about what happened at the farm would likely travel quickly, and no one would risk helping her, with Landa thinking it likely that one of her neighbors would turn her in. This is why he says, "Au revoir, Shosanna," which means goodbye till we meet again, rather than simply adieu, which means goodbye. But still, it wouldn't have been difficult to order his soldiers after her, so why didn't he, if exterminating Jews was at the top of his agenda? I think it's because Landa doesn't really care about what happens to the Jews either way. He's concerned with tracking them down as that's his job, and he definitely enjoys the feeling of satisfaction that it provides.
Ooh, that's a bingo!
But I don't get the impression that he cares much about what ultimately happens to them. He's more concerned with hunting them than he is actually killing them. When talking to Monsieur Lapidie, Landa claims to take pride in his unofficial title.
I, on the other hand, love my unofficial title, precisely because I've earned it.
He views it as a recognition of his competence at his job. However, late in the movie, when Aldo calls him the Jew hunter, he dismisses it.
Finding people is my specialty, so naturally I worked for the Nazis finding people, and yes, some of them were Jews, but Jew hunter? Just a name that stuck.
Well, you do have to admit, it is catchy.
Upon first viewing, these two positions are seemingly contradictory. Either you are proud of your title or you aren't. But I think the truth lies somewhere in between the two. It's clear that he prides himself in his ability to think like a Jew. He believes that most Nazi soldiers have such disparaging views on Jewish people that it limits their ability to empathize and therefore anticipate their action.
The feature that makes me such an effective hunter of the Jews is, as opposed to most German soldiers, I can think like a Jew.
But at the same time, if you were asked instead to hunt Englishmen or the Irish, he would have hunted them to the ends of the earth just as enthusiastically. He clearly enjoys the thrill of uncovering mysteries and solving puzzles, and excels at it. And as a villain who I recently covered said,
"If you're good at something, never do it for free."
His particular skill set was highly sought after by the Nazis, which presented him with an opportunity, one which he clearly had no moral compunctions about taking with both hands. His job is clearly an integral part of his identity, as we see Landa get visibly upset when Aldo's surprised that he knows the name of him and his men.
Lieutenant Aldo, if you don't think I wouldn't interrogate every single one of your swastika-marked survivors, you simply aren't operating on the level of mutual respect, I assume.
He sees it as an affront to his professional competence that Aldo doesn't assume he would interrogate every swastika-marked survivor that they left alive. And this makes a lot of sense for the character, as Landa prides himself, above all else, in being exemplary at his job. So of course the mere suggestion that he's anything less than rigorous in his investigations wounds him deeply. Sometime after Shosanna's escape, Friedrich Zoller, a famous war hero and star of an upcoming Nazi propaganda movie, manages to convince Goebbels to move the premiere to Shosanna's cinema in a textbook R/nice guy attempt to get into her pants. When Landa is introduced to her as the head of security for the event and states that in his role as security chief, he must have a private discussion with Shosanna, Zoller, the love-struck puppy that he is, instantly tries to defend her by asking, "What sort of discussion?" To which Landa very calmly replies, "That sounded suspiciously like a private questioning the order of a colonel. Or am I just being sensitive?" Causing Zoller to respond timidly, "Nothing could be further from the truth, Colonel. Your authority is beyond question." This is a great example of what separates him from most cookie-cutter, insert generic evil Nazi officer type characters. While Landa is the superior in terms of rank, one could make a very compelling case that Zoller is more important to the larger war effort due to his celebrity status and the boost in morale that they can expect from his film. As head of security, Landa is more easily expendable. Therefore, any direct aggressive conflict between them might not necessarily go in Landa's favor. So rather than escalating the situation with chest beating or slapping him and shouting,
We will ask the questions! What the hell?
He gives Zoller an opportunity to save face and walk back his question, implying that it was possible that he simply misunderstood. While he refuses to be questioned by a subordinate, he prevents the situation from descending into a needless knob measuring contest. This subtle assertion of his authority forces Zoller to apologize and ultimately leave. Before Shosanna's interrogation begins in earnest, a waiter comes over and Landa pulls the Giga Chad move of ordering a strudel and milk for her without even consulting her, despite having just met her. Some fans think that this is his way of letting her know that he knows who she really is because her family was murdered at a dairy farm. But I'm calling bullshit on this theory. There's just not enough there to support it. She's just about to dig in when he realizes that he forgot to order the cream for it. He even prevents her from continuing without it, insisting that she wait for them to bring the cream first. At first glance, this is a seemingly insignificant detail, but it demonstrates his strong sense of order and willingness to exert control on those around him. He's a precise man who believes that there's a right way and a wrong way to do things, even things as trivial as eating a pastry. Later in the interrogation, when Shosanna is recounting how she met Zoller, he gently interrupts her to reassure her that this is just a formality and that she need not be anxious. A tactic we already saw him deploy against Monsieur Lapédite to great effect. Yet despite knowing that this is part of his manipulation tactics, you can't help but feel positively towards him. There's just something about polite villains that makes it so easy to overlook all of their atrocities. Part of me acknowledges the absurdity of this. Sure, you've killed hundreds of innocent people, but you speak to people politely and you say please and thank you, so you can't be all that bad. Even the way he frames his orders as questions almost gaslights you into thinking that they're just suggestions. You see this when he tells Shosanna that she will have to be the projectionist at the movie premiere, as Minister Goebbels would want the success or failure of his event to hinge upon the competence of a black person. He ends with, "Is that acceptable?" Again, implying that she has a choice in the matter, when both parties understand that she doesn't. The way he constantly oscillates between super intense and formal to light-hearted and quite familiar at the drop of a hat constantly keeps you off balance. If I was in Shosanna's position, I wouldn't know whether I'm expected to respond with polite deference or reciprocate the friendly informality. A great example of this occurs at the end of the interrogation. After a series of probing questions, he ends with an ominous, "I did have something else I wanted to ask you," and lets it hang in the air like a protein fart on a humid day for an unsettlingly long amount of time, before casually laughing and saying, I can't remember it. Couldn't have been that important. I still can't decide if it's just a tactic to leave her squirming and potentially glean some information from her reaction, or if it's just a random quirk of his personality. But either way, the unnerving effect is just the same. While investigating the aftermath of the tavern basement shootout, Landa identifies 2 of the corpses as members of the Bastards. Despite this being consistent with their history of dressing up as Nazi officers in order to ambush unsuspecting soldiers, he also recognizes that fighting in a strategically disadvantageous location, like a goddamn basement, is inconsistent with their usual MO. And while he can't quite put his finger on what exactly went on, he recognizes that he's missing something. So when he finds Bridget von Hammersmark's signed napkin along with her shoe, he surmises that she must be the missing piece of the puzzle. On the night of the movie premiere, he greets von Hammersmark like you would an old friend you haven't seen in a long time. He inquires why her leg is in a cast. And when she responds that she broke it in a mountain climbing accident, he breaks out in a laughing fit. I've never really understood why this cracks him up so much, so I'm gonna crowdsource a possible explanation. Let me know if you have any theories as to why he started laughing so violently in the comments. Anyway, he continues to question her about her mountain climbing accident and spots that her cast looks fresh and remarks that she must have had the accident yesterday, baiting the trap which von Hammersmark unwittingly falls for by stating, "Yes, it happened yesterday morning." To which he straight-facedly responds, "And where in Paris is this mountain?" After he notices that she's dumbstruck and has no response, he immediately relents and claims that he was just teasing and swiftly moves onto her lovely Italian escorts. Which not only gives us the funniest scene in the entire movie, but also reaffirms one of the most important parts of Landa's personality. He's patient. He doesn't reveal his hand until he has the opportunity to use it for maximum impact. He's onto them already. He knows that they aren't who they say they are, but rather than calling for the guards, he simply decides to have a little fun and screw with them.
Margarete. Ma e lei? Dominic De Coco. Come? Dominic De Coco. Bravo.
This is the point at which he has to be absolutely certain what exactly is going on. And deep down, the bastards, if they have even half a brain cell between them, they have to know he's onto them. I mean, why else would you feasibly congratulate a grown-ass adult for saying their own name? But Landa continues with the charade and allows them to go to their seats. He then requests a private talk with von Hammersmark. He maintains his veneer of polite formality before asking her to place her foot on his lap. He then proceeds to take off her shoe and asks that she reach into his coat pocket and bring out whatever she finds in it. You can see the exact moment where she realizes what's in the pocket and knows that she's been found out. Landa notices this too, but nods her along regardless. They both know how this is going to end, but once again, he insists that things are done the right way. After placing the shoe on her foot and making a little joke to celebrate his victory,
It's an American expression. If the shoe fits, you must wear it.
von Hammersmark asks, "What now?" Then suddenly, out of nowhere, Landa violently lunges at her, choking her to death. While this would be shocking from anyone, but the fact that it comes from Landa makes it that much more surprising. Up until now, he hasn't so much as raised his voice at anyone. He's always so poised and in control. This is really the first scene where we see him lose control and look visibly enraged. That's what makes it all the more terrifying. We're so used to seeing the smooth, calm exterior that a brief glimpse of the monster that lies beneath the depths leaves no doubt in your mind that the kindly Landa that you thought you knew was no more than a mask. Notice that while choking her, we see his hair get disheveled, but immediately after ordering Aldo's arrest, his very next concern is fixing his hair. He's a man of precision and order, and not even a potentially history-altering event is an excuse for even a single hair to be out of place. This is also a testament to how much of a psychopath he is, that moments after strangling someone to death with his bare hands, he's back to cracking jokes like nothing happened. Being the loquacious man that he is, of course he has to celebrate victory with a speech and a pithy little quote luxuriating in the fact that Aldo is completely under his control.
Alas, you're now in the hands of the SS. My hands, to be exact. They've been waiting a long time to touch you. Got you flinching.
Which leaves him vulnerable to this amazing cheap shot headbutt. But we'll circle back to this later. When Aldo mentions Bridget von Hammersmark, he uncharacteristically lets a twinge of visible anger slip and states that she got what she deserved. Again, this is the second time that we see him visibly lose his composure, the other being the violent strangulation, if that wasn't obvious. But it would appear that he's deeply offended or enraged by the fact that she betrayed the Nazi party to the Allies. If so, that would be quite hypocritical, considering that he intends to do the exact same thing. My best guess is that he's professionally offended that she didn't even bother to come up with a convincing cover story. But I'm open to alternative ideas in the comments. Like I said earlier, he's a predator who likes to toy with his prey before pouncing.
If I were sitting where you're sitting, would you show me mercy? Nope. What is that English expression about shoes and feet?
Looks like the shoe's on the other foot. Yeah, just think of it.
I think he knows the phrase is the shoe is on the other foot, but he just wants to have Aldo acknowledge that he's up shit's creek and Landa's holding all the paddles. Having established that he has all the leverage and that Aldo and his team are over the proverbial barrel, Landa then dangles them a morsel of hope, a faint light at the end of the tunnel.
Well, I have no intention of killing Hitler and killing guns and killing Goering and killing Bormann, not to mention winning the war single-handedly for the Allies, only later to find myself standing before a Jewish tribunal. If you want to win the war tonight, we have to make a deal.
At this point in the war, the writing is on the wall. The Germans are stretched too thin and are fighting on multiple fronts. They're clearly overwhelmingly outnumbered and outgunned. So it's not so much a question of if the Nazi regime will fall, it's simply a question of when. And Hans Landa, above all else, is motivated by his own self-interest. So of course he's willing to accelerate the fall of Germany if it saves him from answering for his war crimes. Initially, Aldo was skeptical of the offer, stating that if an offer seems too good to be true, it's likely because it is. Like any master negotiator, Landa first acknowledges and validates his skepticism by saying that he would think the same if the roles were reversed, even going as far as to say that 99.99% of the time, Aldo would be right in thinking this, but ultimately appeals to his vanity and the almost universal desire to make history.
Every once in a while, fate reaches out and extends its hand. What shall the history books read?
Landa understands the thought process of the higher-ups of the Allied forces. He knows that they want justice for the Jews and other murdered peoples of Europe. He knows that ideally they would have him and all the other Nazis that committed atrocities to pay for their crimes. But he also understands that their first priority is bringing the war to a swift and favorable conclusion. He knows that when faced with the conflicting objectives between justice and ending the war instantly, they will do their cost-benefit analysis and select the expedient option over perhaps the more honorable one. Not so fun fact that while Inglourious Basterds is basically historical fan fiction, this is more or less what happened after World War II. A lot of Nazis who committed atrocities were either formally pardoned or had their crimes secretly swept under the rug if they were deemed sufficiently important to the Cold War effort against the USSR. Who needs fictional villains when you've got history, right? Up until now, I've described Landa as pretty much a flawless villain, but everybody's got a weakness. And if I had to pick one for Landa, it's that he assumes that everyone is just as rational as him, or at least that they calculate their cost-benefit analysis before engaging in action in the same way that he does. A great example of this is when he was gloating at a handcuffed and blindfolded Aldo, ended up getting a headbutt in the nose as a reward. Any prisoner of sound mind who's tied up with a bag over their head wouldn't attempt to anger their captor by headbutting them, as he's at their mercy, and this small act of defiance could easily end up being repaid with a whole lot of interest. Landa knows all of this and knows that in that position he wouldn't take the risk, which is why he's so caught off guard like this. This is the first time we see someone get the better of him by exploiting this blind spot. Aldo the Apache, lunatic that he is clearly comfortable trading his potential suffering for a crack at an enemy who's having too much fun at his expense. I can't decide if this is because Aldo has balls of steel, or if he's dumb as a bag of rocks and doesn't think much past his initial impulses. Most likely a little from column A and a little from column B. Either way, Landa didn't seem to learn this about Aldo, and this causes him to overplay his hand. While on the radio with OSS Command, he requests that his military records be altered to show that he was a member of Operation Kino from the beginning, acting as a double agent, and that all his actions were sanctioned by the OSS in order to maintain his cover with the Nazis. Additionally, he requests a full pension and benefits. He also asks for a Congressional Medal of Honor for his services in toppling the Third Reich, and even mocks Aldo, saying that he wants medals of honor for everyone involved in Operation Kino. At this point, Aldo almost physically winces. I'm pretty confident that this was the point where he decided that he'd heard more than enough. But Landa, certain of his control in this situation, keeps pushing and requests that the US government purchase land for him on Nantucket Island. As they drive to the Allied base, Landa smiles obliviously, even plays with Aldo's knife. The entire time you can basically see the steam coming out of Aldo's ears. When they cross the border into Allied territory, where Aldo is uncuffed, he immediately shoots Landa's assistant. Unable to let Landa get away with his crimes completely consequence-free, Landa makes a last-ditch attempt to save himself by appealing to Aldo's self-interest.
You'll be shot for this?
Nah, I don't think so. More like chewed out. I've been chewed out before.
He's already factored in the cost and consequences of this course of actions, while Landa would be unwilling to sacrifice career progression and potentially even being court-martialed for the slightest modicum of justice. Aldo is willing and happy to pay the toll.
I'm gonna give you a little something you can't take off.
One part of Landa that's always confused me is his morality. Don't get me wrong, he's unambiguously an evil piece of crap, but what I can't tell is whether he's more or less evil than your run-of-the-mill banality of evil type Nazi. On one hand, he acknowledges the humanity of Jews and even has a begrudging respect for them. He recognizes that hatred of Jews isn't based on any logic or real threat that they present during his squirrels versus rats analogy. But on the other hand, he still does liken them to vermin, which isn't exactly the most favorable comparison. And despite knowing that they're people just like he is and understanding that they aren't really that different, he still continues to hunt them down mercilessly, not out of hatred or even civic duty, but more for the pleasure of a job well done. Well, that and political advancement. The impression that Hans leaves me with is that he's hyper-competent, intelligent, but more than anything else, an opportunist. It's not so much that he's immoral or hateful, he's more amoral. He's worried about self-preservation above all. When the Nazis have the upper hand, he's happy to hunt Jews for them. And when the Allies have the upper hand, he's happy to facilitate the murder of the leaders of the Nazi party. He has no allegiance or moral compass guiding his actions, only self-preservation and personal advancement. Characters like Hans are terrifying because they exist in the real world, incredibly talented people without even the slightest twinge of a conscience. If he was born today, he'd probably be the CEO of a faceless industrial corporation that pours toxic waste into rivers, or a mob defense lawyer, or a pump and dump crypto bro. I'm gonna leave you with a final question which still has me stumped. Would Hans be a worse person if he simply bought into the Nazi propaganda and fully believed the lies they perpetuated and was hunting Jews instead for the perceived betterment of his people? Or does the fact that he understands perfectly well that there's no moral case to be made for their extermination make his crimes all the more evil? Let me know what you think in the comments. Moral relativism aside, I had a lot of fun making this video. Christoph Waltz is one of my favorite actors, and having an excuse to rewatch this movie a couple of times was great. Fun fact, the movie almost didn't get made because Quentin Tarantino wasn't sure that he could find anyone who could act out the role because it required mastery of English, French, Italian, and German, in addition to giving off major Nazi vibes. Thanks for watching this far. If you liked the video and the fact that you're still here, suggest that you did. Like the video, and feel free to suggest any other villains that I should cover in the comments.
Arrivederci. Arrivederci. Arrivederci.